Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. We have a big group with us, so we're going to give people a few minutes to settle in and get connected. We will have everyone on mute for this session, but I want to draw your attention to the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen. We have a panel of experts who will be answering your questions as we go today, and we'll also stay on the line and cover a few of your questions towards the end of the session. Now I'm going to go ahead and present our speaker for today. You can see him waving at you in our video chat box. Andrew Mackenzie is a 27-year veteran in the financial services industry. He's currently responsible for supporting high-performing consultants and helping Canadians achieve financial confidence. He is a trusted authority on topics including retirement and estate planning, investments, and protection strategies. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Andrew to present our content for today.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. The purpose of today's conference call is really just to go through some perspective on what's going on in the markets right now, how it's going to impact your plan going forward, and what we can do about it to make sure that things turn out well for us. So let's get started. What we're going to cover: current market conditions, staying the course and why it's so important, strategies to navigate through turbulent times, and IG's approach. So what we're going to cover tonight is some perspective on the markets that we've got going on right now. So I'm going to give you that first. And then we're going to go through some of the issues that pertain to retirement today. And then we're going to go through an actual case study of what planning can really mean and optimizing someone's situation. So let's get rolling. The one constant: change. It's inevitable. One of the things that has gone on lately, obviously, we've had a pretty big pullback in the markets due to COVID-19, which has changed life for everyone these days. But let's just take a look back, if we could, to the death of capitalism on March 9th, 2009, a period of great concern for investors. If you look back and we see what happened in the markets back then, that was mainly due to a banking issue. And so bank stocks went way down. I call them big blue up here in Canada. And just some perspective for you, the markets back in 2009, which is as low as it ever got, was probably the best buying opportunity we were ever going to see in our lifetime. And if we take a look at the screen that's up in front of you right now, it's a great slide, because what it shows is what happened back in 2009 and put it into perspective. So obviously we had a downturn in the markets, but what happened after that? And as you can see, with very few exceptions, we had an almost straight upward trajectory in the markets for about 11 years, interrupted recently by COVID-19. Let's take a look. That market correction back in 2009 had some interesting effects. One of the things that most people are unaware of is that we have just come out of the longest, strongest bull market that we have ever seen in our lifetimes and our parents' lifetimes. Now, it was also earmarked by a great amount of pessimism. People constantly waiting for the hammer to drop again. And as the markets have proven over time, if that's what you're waiting for, eventually you will get it. And we've seen it happen lately. So let's take a look, though, and put it into perspective. Markets like this offer an opportunity that is rarely seen. And if you take a look at what the markets have done since 2009, the Standard & Poor, or the US market, had an average return of 15.3% over 11 years. The world index did 12.5%. Europe did 8.9%, and Canada did 9.2%. If you had a basket equally weighted of all those four security baskets, you would have averaged over 11%. But that doesn't tend to happen, does it? Here's why. If we take a look at the screen, I know it's a busy screen. Once you understand it, it's pretty clear, though. What it tells the tale of is where are people putting their money and when. If you take a look at the two big bars on the right-hand side, the blue bar is money going into bonds or safe havens. The gray bar is money going into or out of equity mutual funds or equities in general. And so if you take a look over this time frame, the longest, strongest bull market that we've ever seen, we actually had more money go safe than went into the markets. And particularly earmarked by the years that were challenged in their returns. 2008, for example, significantly more money came out of equities than went in. And so what do? What's the lesson here? Is that we tend to respond emotionally to events that occur in our portfolio. So what we often do is we'll take a look at our most recent statement, and if it's gone up, we're happy. If it's gone down, we're sad. And if you think back to your statement that you got earlier on this year in January from the end of December, we had some extraordinary returns back in 2019. And so we were quite happy. And then the market started to pull back due to fears of COVID-19. And what's gone on since? Well, money's starting to come out again. So this is one of the greatest challenges that we face. Now the question becomes, how bad is this going to get? Is this time going to be different than every other time? Is it going to be the one that ends it all? And you know, it's interesting because every single time this happens in the marketplace, the same response occurs. Back in 2008 and 2009, the response was, got to get out. Things are never going to go back up again, and time always proves us wrong, as demonstrated by this. This is a fantastic slide. If you take a look at it, it's the market returns since 1956 up until present day, marked, if you'll note, by an almost straight upward trajectory over that time frame, because little bumps, actually big bumps at the time, over a long period of time and put into perspective, don't end up being as big as we once thought they were. Of particular interest on this slide, every single point that is circled with a red dot, that is when the markets went down by 10% or more over that time frame. And the one thing that's very interesting to note is that there's no red dot that's lower than the previous red dot. In other words, the markets always go up over time. The analogy is it's like walking up a hill, playing with a yo-yo. So short term, it's going up and down, up and down, up and down, but over time, it's going straight up the hill. So this is something that we want to broaden our perspective with. And the reason why I say that is oftentimes when things get very emotional, and I don't know if you have ever heard the saying, you can't see the forest for the trees. In other words, we're so inundated with current day issues that are right in our face that we forget to see the big picture. And sometimes, and in any forest, if you think about it, there are live trees and healthy trees and dying trees and dead trees. And that all makes part of a healthy ecosystem. And so if we can step back and look at the lush green forest, it may offer us a feeling of comfort. Now here's the stats. Over time, 70% of the time markets are positive. Now that may come as a surprise to some of you, especially at a time like this, but 70% of the time we're happy with our statements. I would argue that many of you probably think 70% seems like a lot, and maybe it does, but here's why. Is that when you get a statement where your portfolio has gone up, you're happy, and you probably put it aside. When it's gone down, you're not happy, and you don't put it aside. Maybe that's when you call your advisor and say, what's going on here? Why didn't we move? All the usual questions that we can get. But the stats say most of the time the markets go up, and occasionally they go down. This is a great slide, and I think it puts it into amazing perspective. And the tale is not told for 2020 yet. Now, we had a very strong market in 2019, so we'll see how 2020 is going to end. But if you take a look at all of these years, and there's a lot of years, what the red dot represents is the lowest the market got in any one year. So if you can imagine, even in years where the market did 26% in the first year, or most of the way down where it did 34%, or it did 23%, at the lowest point of that year, the return was negative. So we don't know how 2020 is going to end. We'll be able to tell you that on December 31st, 2020. Up until then, it's anybody's guess. So who knows what effect COVID-19 is going to have on our markets long term, but if time tells a tale, it tells us that the recovery is going to be extraordinary. One thing to keep in mind is that when you're at the grocery store, keeping your 6-foot distance, of course, if tuna's on sale, you buy 4 of them. If investments go on sale, we tend to avoid them like the plague. So that's something that we want to be conscious of. All right. Now, we've addressed the markets and what's gone on there. Now, how do we best protect our nest egg? So what do we do now, in other words? Strategy number 1, have a plan and stick to it. It's interesting because the Living Plan by IG Wealth Management is designed to weather exactly what we're going through right now. And so what we want to do is take into account that over the span of our lifetimes, we're going to have years that aren't good in their returns. But we still have to have a plan. And what I'm going to cover off here is I'm going to talk about some of the challenges and the reason why we can't just run to save money, because that may be the most dangerous thing to do. Again, proper diversification really is what I'm getting at there, and investing for the long term, not taking a look at the trees so carefully as you do the forest, and determining your retirement income withdrawal strategy. In times like this, it becomes even more important that we control the things that we can control and we minimize the things that we cannot control. And the best way to do that is to take professional advice. Someone who has a bit of a distance from it and can see things very objectively and offer you solutions that are going to work for you. So let's take a look at what retirement peace of mind looks like and some of the issues that pertain to it. Canadians are enjoying longer retirements than they ever have before. And one of the things that I always say to an audience, which I have to tell you, I miss having a live audience because I like to interact with the people that I'm talking to. So please, if you can, give me a smile and the energy will come across the screen. But what's going on if you think about it? Where did we learn our money smarts? Generally speaking, we learned it from our parents. I can say for sure I've got a business degree and I didn't learn much about it when I was in university. I didn't learn about it in high school or public school. So where did I learn my money smarts from? My parents. And so what did our parents' situation look like? Well, they in turn, of course, inherited their money smarts from their parents. And back then, people retired at 65, and the average person would pass away at age 72. The lifespan wasn't nearly as long. So they had a 7-year retirement. Today, on the other hand, the average male will live to be age 83, the average female 86, and there's a 50-50 chance that one of a couple, either him or her, will live past age 90. And you combine that with earlier retirements, and you say, if I retire at 60 and I live till I'm 90, that's a 30-year span of retirement. Then we start to deal with things like inflation. And if you take a look, now this isn't 30 years ago, it's 50 years ago, but French fries used to cost 15 cents. Today they're $1.79. You can get a cheeseburger in the 60s for 20 cents. Now they're $1.69. Inflation plays its role. So
now, Andrew, we are having some people sending you some smiles, definitely through the chat. We're going to save most of the questions until the end, but we had someone ask, where can they get a cheeseburger for $1.69 today?
You know, it's funny, the first time I saw this slide, I wondered that myself, but I'm pretty sure it's McDonald's coupons. I think it does exist today, but for the most part, they're far more than that, for sure. So, good question. Keep it light. All right, let's continue on here. Now, one of the concerns that a lot of people have today, and it is a real concern, is that poor early returns can affect your longevity of your money. And that is true. So let's take a look at that for a second if we can. In a world of averages, and in this case, we've got $100,000, we're taking out $600 every month to live on as a retirement income, and we've got a 5% average rate of return. Now keep in mind, in this scenario, the 5% is every year, never changes, always 5%. What's going to happen is your money is going to be depleted fully by the time you are age 89. from age 65. So that's what happens if you have a straight line return. Well, let's take a look at with volatility. In this scenario, we've got a sequence of returns. Our average return is the same, it's 5%. So in year one, you make 5%. In year two, you lose 15%. In year three, you make 25%. And then again in year four, you make 5%, and the same pattern repeats. So in other words, we have poor early returns. Now, the same scenario, your money runs out at age 83. It takes 6 years off of your portfolio. Let's take a look at the other scenario where it goes in the exact other direction. You make 5%, then you make 25%, then you lose 15%, then you make 5%, and the same pattern repeating. What's going to happen? Now, we deplete the money at age 87. In other words, volatility can be damaging to your portfolio when you're drawing your retirement income from it. And just to pause to reflect for a moment, the difference between pre-retirement and post-retirement are very different. If you can imagine, in both of those scenarios, it wasn't a matter of depleting your money if you're just saving it. You're going to make 5% one way or the other over time. But if you're withdrawing from the money over time, the sequence of returns matters tremendously. And that falls to how do we design our portfolios. Now, if you take a look at retirement sustainability again, and this is a 5% withdrawal rate, so we're taking 5% out. In this case, it's $500,000 is our starting nest egg, and we're taking out 5% a year, so $25,000 each year. The average return is 5.9%. How long is the money going to last? Well, at a straight line, 5.9%, it'll run out by the time you're 100, which is a pretty good age to count on for a retirement span. But what's the reality of it? With volatility, it can be a million different scenarios. And so one of the greatest challenges we face is we've got these ups and downs in the markets because we know we're not going to have a steady rate of return, because anything that offers a steady rate of return doesn't pay 5.9%. So there's our catch-22. What do we do? Make sense?
Now, Andrew, we are saving most of the questions until the end of the presentation, but we got one that I think is relevant just when you were on the last slide there, and it said, what's the point of trying to predict all of this? Nobody knows where the markets are going to be when I actually retire or am living in retirement.
Right, that's actually a fantastic question, and it's very pointed. It makes a lot of sense. It's actually one of the things that I would say one of the smartest questions you can ask. Here's how we overcome that. One of the greatest challenges to longevity of a portfolio is what we call a withdrawal rate. And so in this scenario that we're looking at here, it's a 5% withdrawal rate. And so as you can imagine, the amount of the portfolio that you're taking out every year, if you can imagine, the smaller proportion of your portfolio that you take out to live on, the more likely your portfolio is going to last over a long period of time. And based on random rates of return, we have the ability within our financial planning software to forecast what we call Monte Carlo analysis. It sounds like you're going to Vegas, but it's not. What it does is it randomizes volatile rates of return over a long period of time using hundreds or thousands of scenarios. So what it comes back to us with is, what is your percentage likelihood of being able to achieve the retirement that you've set out for yourself? And as you can imagine, a 25% likelihood is not very good. An 85% likelihood is quite good. And so what we're able to do is make sense out of that. I think in math they call it chaos theory. So that's what we do there. Now, diversification, and this is one of the tough ones. And I'll tell you a quick story. I heard about, it was maybe 10 years ago, the best performing US equity mutual fund over the last 20 years had averaged 18%. It had done extraordinarily well. But do you know what the average experienced return by the average investor in that fund was? It was about 4%. And you go, well, how can that possibly be? And the reason why is, if you think about the psychology of investing, what do? And I just want you to imagine walking into a bank branch and looking up at the board, and you see GIC 3%, mutual fund 12%. Which one do you want? Probably want the mutual fund because you want the 12% return. So you're going to buy there. What if you walked into the bank and up on the screen you saw GIC 3%, mutual fund minus 8%? Now which one do you want? You're probably going to buy the GIC. And so the moral of that story is, what we tend to want to do is to buy when things are high and sell when things are low. And as you can imagine, that doesn't work out very well. So what one of the biggest dangers is, for example, a retiree, maybe they're 65 years old and they've been retired for a few years, and they have a portfolio that is comprised of nothing but equities. And then COVID hits, or 2008 hits. What happens? Well, the value of their portfolio has gone down to here, but they're still having to take out the same amount of money to live on, meaning they're depleting their portfolio. And when the recovery occurs, it recovers with less money, meaning we need to be diversified. We need to have money in place so that we can draw our income from sources that didn't get hit very hard. For example, one of the stories that isn't going around the table too much these days, equities have gone down, we all know that. But what happened to fixed income? I don't know if you're aware of this, but when interest rates go down, fixed income vehicles appreciate in value. So interest rates have come down as a COVID-19 measure. And so fixed income has actually appreciated to some degree, meaning that was a pretty safe haven. But if you have all your money there, you're not going to achieve the rates of return that you need to achieve to look after your retirement over a 30-year span of retirement. That's the greatest challenge that we face today in terms of how do we make our money last. And it's a combination of being properly invested so that we are safe enough to draw our income, but aggressive enough to earn the returns. We can't have one without the other. So let's take a look at maximizing your retirement paycheck. And I'm just going to wrap it up with this. It's a case example. And the one thing that I do want to give you the caveat to before we get into this, it's a case of Nicole and Sam. They're only a few years away from retirement, and they've got a certain amount of assets, they've got a certain lifestyle, and it's not going to be your lifestyle, and it's not going to be your assets. I recognize that. And so all we can do, as you can well imagine, is choose a scenario and run you through it. So please don't try to personalize this too much. What I would ask you to do is to look at the analysis that was done and how it improved their overall situation. So let's take a look at Nicole and Sam. As I said, they're going to retire in 2022. If you take a look at their assets, they've got a combination of conservatively invested, fully invested, TFSAs, non-registered, and RSPs. And they've managed to accumulate about $1.3 million. So that's our starting point. They have a plan, as you can imagine most people do. Their plan, number one, is to draw on their RSPs early because they don't want to get hit with too much tax, which is a logical strategy. But is it the best strategy? There's only one way to know, and that's to run your numbers. I always say, run your numbers. My analogy is, anytime that you proceed without running your numbers, it's like standing at the top of a mountain in the Rocky Mountains, shrouded in fog. The view is beautiful, but you can't see it. Then the wind blows and the clouds go away and you feel like you can see for 1,000 miles. And that's what doing your numbers is all about. It's figuring out where you really stand and offering you the clarity about what your financial situation is really looking like. So their first strategy, take RSPs out early. Second strategy, they have a chalet. They own a cottage. And it's worth quite a bit of money, and it's got a lot of gains on it, and they're going to be taxable. So what they want to do is they want to move that chalet into their son Al's name. They're going to prepay a bit of tax, but then it'll save them tax down the road when they eventually pass away on any future growth that the cottage would have accumulated. Seems to make pretty good sense too. Al doesn't have any savings, their son, and he's engaged to someone that they barely know. And so that is going to cause a number of other potential challenges down the road if they move that asset into Al's name. I'm not going to get into that tonight, but it can cause some pretty drastic measures if they ever ended up not having their marriage work out. And their TFSAs, what do they use them for? Mostly they use them as a short-term reserve. They use them when they need to get the roof done, and it's that little extra money that you need every now and again. That's what they use their TFSAs for. So let's take a look. Here's their needs. They want to be able to live on $72,000 a year in fixed expenses and $39,600 in discretionary expenses, vacations, going out for dinner, that sort of thing. So their total income need every year after tax is $111,600. Now, of course, the taxes to be paid. So if you take a look at the bar chart on the far right, the blue represents the money they need. The gray represents their tax bill. If you take their other fixed income, illustrated there, we've got $55,000 in pension income, we've got $22,000 of CP and OAS, interest from their GICs, and then they have their $1.3 million portfolio. So their fixed income is covering the first $83,000. The rest has to be made up from their portfolio. So where do they stand today? There's the $1 million question. Here's the strategies that we put in place. What we do, and I'm just gonna quickly flip to this slide. This slide represents our analysis. So the first thing that we're gonna do with our planning is we're gonna take a look at where are they headed now. So as you can imagine, the process that we typically follow is here's where you're at today, here's where you want to be tomorrow, how do we pave the road between the two? But our first step is always to say, what's going to happen if the plan you've got laid out is the one that you follow? And in this scenario, as you can see by the red bars, those red bars mean they don't have enough money to do what they wanted to do. So in other words, they fall short of their goal. Now, going back here, once we've done that, what we're going to do is take a look at some strategies that they could implement. And some of the strategies we took a look at was, let's split their pension income so that they have an equal amount of income during their retirement life. Because if you can imagine, the lowest marginal tax rate in Ontario is 20%. The highest is 53%. So if one is being taxed at that very high rate, one's being taxed at that very low rate, if we can shift some income over to the other spouse, we can drastically reduce our tax bill. So that's tax savings item number one, split their pension income. Strategy number two, ironically, as logical as it sounded, it made more sense for them to take their RSPs out later than earlier. As you're going to find out, it does cause them to have a slightly higher tax bill, but it also causes them to have a much greater longevity of retirement assets. So that was one of the things that we discovered. The other thing we discovered, number three, is to purchase a small annuity. And if you can imagine, many people don't know what an annuity is. It's basically like a defined benefit pension plan. You hand over a certain amount of money, and in return, the insurance company will pay you a guaranteed income for life. Now, why do you buy an annuity? It's not because it's got a great rate of return on it. You buy an annuity because what it protects against is longevity risk. If you'll remember, the average man lives till age 83. What if you happen to be that man that lives till 95? Well, if you have an annuity, you're going to do very well by it because the insurance company is going to be paying you for 12 years longer than they anticipated they would have had to. So you do very well. It adds a great deal of certainty to your retirement income. And option number four is optimize their TFSAs. Use them properly. Invest them properly for the long term. And if you think about it, using TFSAs for a short-term vehicle doesn't make much sense because we take money from an asset that costs us nothing in tax and we save the money that costs us in tax. That doesn't make sense. We want to save our TFSAs for the long term. So those are the strategies that we put in place. Now let's just take a look at what the effects of those strategies are. And I'm going to illustrate that with bar graphs. So just to explain what you're looking at right now, on the left-hand side of your screen is 3 categories. How much money they can spend over the span of their life, which is about $6 million. How much they're going to pay in tax over the span of their life, which is just under $2 million. And how much of an estate are they going to leave behind for Al, which is just over $2 million. So let's just take a look at the net effect of each of these changes that we're suggesting that they make. First, split pension income. If you'll note, the lifetime tax went down slightly, the estate goes up slightly, and their spending abilities go up. And on the right-hand side, you can see the net effect that that has had. So slightly greater lifetime spending and slightly less lifetime tax. So that was good. And they went, remember the Monte Carlo I talked to you about earlier? Well, I'm just going to slide back here for a second. 66% is the likelihood of their plan coming to fruition. If we split pension income, it goes to 67%, which is an improvement. Then what happens if we change the order of redemptions? And so we don't withdraw from the RSPs early, we withdraw from them later. The net lifetime spending goes up significantly. In fact, the deficit that they were facing was about $550,000, and we've effectively overcome that. Their lifetime tax goes up a little bit because they're taking more out of RSPs over a long period of time, but their net estate also goes up, and their likelihood of being able to achieve their retirement goals goes to 83%. Buying the annuity. One thing that you may note here is that the net estate went down a little bit because now you're not going to be leaving that money behind for Al in the end. But what it does is it gives you an evened out and a more secure income over the span of your lifetime, which brings their percentage likelihood of them achieving their goals to 89%. Optimizing the TFSA, in other words, using them intelligently. 92% we go to, and lifetime spending again goes up, and the net estate goes way up. So far, we've achieved $600,000 more for Al than what we started with. And now a big one. We're going to defer the capital gains on the cottage. We're just going to keep it in our own name. And the reason why we're going to do that is we're not going to have to part with a few $100,000 in tax today. We can get it working for us and adding to our retirement nest egg. And in the end, if you'll take a look, 95% likelihood of achieving our retirement goals, and we leave Al just over an additional $1 million. The way that I like to summarize this one up is with this slide. We talk about a typical outcome versus an optimal outcome. I would say the typical outcome is the plan that they originally had laid out for themselves. What they were going to do at first blush looked logical, but upon review and with the blowing away of the wind so we could have that clear view of the mountains, we could figure out that there was a better way. We could have greater longevity of our retirement income, we could have a much greater percentage chance of it coming true, and we were able to leave Al an additional $1 million, all with good planning, an optimal outcome. All right, our approach, what do? We don't take a look at your investments and say, here's what we think you should own. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at your outcomes or your desired outcomes and say, here's the best way to achieve them. And that can be sharing your wealth with either loved ones or charities, managing your cash flow effectively, preparing for the unexpected. That usually involves insurances, planning for major expenditures, cottage purchase, education for the kids, optimizing your retirement, or maximizing your business success. So we're going to take a look at all of these things and figure out the best possible way to achieve them. We are not going to do this on our own. We have a raft of experts, accountants, lawyers, estate planning lawyers, tax lawyers, that insurance specialists, security specialists, mortgage specialists, all that chime in on your behalf to make sure that we come up with the optimal solution for you. So what's our process? To create your IT living plan, we need to take a look at where you're at today, understand where you want to get to tomorrow. We're going to go back and develop that comprehensive plan. We're going to customize your investment program to make sure that it's designed to weather markets like we're in right now. And then we're going to implement that strategy. And like the Apollo mission going to the moon, most people are unaware that it was off track about 99% of the time. But every time it got slightly off track, they'd fire a jet and bring it back on course, and fire a jet and bring it back on course. And we're going to do the same thing, because life is guaranteed to be anything but static. Things are going to change. So we need to be adaptable. That's why we call it the living plan. And so we're going to need to redo that or take a look at it and make sure you're still on track at least every year or two. That's the process that we follow. And that's the process that is even more important than ever before to do that at a time like this. Thank you everyone for your attention, and I hope you have a great day, and please stay safe.
Thank you, everyone. I have Douglas McLaughlin and David Irwin joining Andrew now for our Q&A session. And for any of you that were keeping an eye on the chat box, they were busy writing back to your questions as we went. And we had a lot of really great questions during this session. So thank you for all of your participation. We're going to jump right into some of the questions, and I've tried to group them. One of the first questions that we got was from John. It was, do you recommend changing your investment strategy and increasing your risk to regain some of the loss in the recent months?
All right, Doug, maybe you're the best one to answer that one.
You know, I can take that one.
David.
That on the chat, and I think you know, changing your risk tolerance is really a personal decision and should be something that you discuss with your advisor. The opportunities obviously would appear to exist, but taking into consideration your true tolerance for risk, going through a detailed discussion, and ultimately what is your long-term goal is really the priority. And that's something that's a very personal discussion and should be taken on a very individual basis.
Okay, and I'll just follow up with a related question that we had from Sue Ann. How will this market volatility attributable to COVID-19 affect our RSPs?
No, that was another good question that I answered. Yeah, that was a question I answered through the chat. And it definitely has an impact on your RSPs, because your RSPs are typically made up of a diversified portfolio. So you're going to have some cash in there, you're going to have some fixed income as well as some equity. So what we've seen is with interest rates going down, cash is earning a little bit less interest. Equities have been volatile, so they dropped fairly steeply originally, and then now we've seen a comeback over the last few weeks. And then on the fixed income side, that's providing a little more stability. And because interest rates have fallen, there's typically an inverse relationship, so that's resulted in some fixed income increasing in value. So absolutely, COVID-19 is having an effect on RSPs, and that's a great reason to reach out to your advisor if they haven't already reached out to you, which I'm sure they have, and just go over your portfolio, where you stand now, and then how that fits in relation to your overall plan that you've put together.
Thank you for that. And there's a few people, and thanks so much for continuing to send your comments in here on the Q&A. I'll go ahead and just let everyone know that for those of you asking if you're going to receive a copy of the presentation, you will receive that in your follow-up email, and that will also have a link to a survey that we'd love for you to fill out and let us know how we did with the virtual seminar, because obviously we usually run these in person, but you will have a copy of the presentation. And the other question that we're getting through the chat here is how this scenario applies to different people. So we had a case study that Andrew went through, and we had a few questions. One was if it applies to people who are already in retirement, or how it would apply to someone who's single. So I'll let one of our panel answer that question about how we handle those different scenarios that aren't necessarily exactly like the case study that we saw tonight.
David?
You can take that one.
Andrew, are you going to take that one? That's a great question for you, because it relates perfectly to PFP, I think, and our individual consultants.
Yeah, okay, yeah, no, I'm happy to answer that question. There's actually a number of questions along those lines. The easiest answer there is I don't know. And I know that sounds a bit trite, but the reality is everybody's situation, whether single or married, is to some degree different. And not every answer is going to be the same for everyone. So honestly, the only way to do it is to sit down, do your numbers, understand where you stand, and make decisions based on what you think you should do. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face in today's day and age is we tend to take what I call water cooler advice. And what I mean by that is, you know, I did this, so maybe you should too. And that is a dangerous way to go about doing your financial planning. So the easiest answer there is I would invest the hour or two that you have to invest in order to get your.
Andrew was just cutting out a little bit there, but I think what he was saying was, you know, take that time, invest that time in kind of getting a customized living plan to see how the scenario works out for you. And this is almost a related question as well from Drew. So I'm going to see if Doug wants to take this one. How long does it take to build a financial plan? What is that time investment in getting a living plan?
You know what, that's a great question. A couple of things. One, I would say that although, you know, we're working differently now and that we're not in our physical offices, all of our IG Wealth Management consultants are working virtually, and we've got lots of tools to be able to meet virtually with clients, and so we can still do the planning process. So what we basically do is we sit down and we gather all your information. So look at where you are right now financially, and then what it is you're trying to accomplish, similar to what Andrew went through, obviously, in his example, and then we put the plan together. So it's going to be a little bit different for everyone. If you are a business owner who's looking at selling your business, and there's a lot of complication involved, then the plan is going to take a little bit longer to build. We're going to pull in more resources. We have an advanced financial planning department in Winnipeg who helps us deal with situations that are really difficult and have lots of moving parts. And so that will take a little longer. If you're a retired couple and it's fairly simple and straightforward, then putting the plan together, you know, would not take very long. We would probably do one meeting to just gather all your information. We would take that away. We would build a plan, set another meeting where we would come back, confirm, present a couple ideas, and then probably one more meeting. So it may just take a few hours.
Great. And Doug, I have a great follow-up question from Stephen that just came in on that. What documents are required to actually go about making a financial plan? Do you want to give people an overview?
Absolutely. The more documents we have, the more accurate we can be. So, and again, as I mentioned earlier, depending on the complexity of the situation, if we're sitting down with a business owner who may have trusts and you know, multiple businesses, then we're looking at T2s, we're looking at which are tax returns. We want to see how the corporation is structured. There's all kinds of documents that we'd be looking for. Obviously, your investment statements, how you're invested. We'd want to go through risk tolerance to see where you are and make sure your investments match. So there could be a lot of things we'd be looking at. And then again, in another situation, like I mentioned earlier, the retired couple who it's fairly straightforward, we might just want to see their tax returns and their individual investment statements and spend a lot of time just speaking with them, getting to know them, you know, what their concerns are, you know, what keeps them up at night, you know, what they'd like to leave their legacy to their families, or do they have thoughts along charitable giving lines? And so it's more about learning about them and more fact-finding than it is about individual documents. So once again, it's going to depend on the situation, but the more we have, the more accurate we can be and the better a plan you're going to get.
Great. And David, just a question for you. It is also related to the topic of the plan. How often would you typically recommend that someone updates their financial plan?
Well, one of the benefits of the living plan process and going through the discovery conversation with your advisor and gathering all of the relevant information to build the plan, it's the ongoing monitoring and evaluation of your progress. And I know that we get a lot of questions about, you know, how do I know if I'm on track, and how do I know if we're doing the right things? Well, you know, the advisors and the clients really have to take ownership in from both sides of the equation, and that is if there's changes in your circumstances, life events, those are the times where you really want to make sure that you're reaching out to your advisor to let them know, so that we can, model those implications in those situations and the impact they might have on your plan. So whether it's an addition to the family, a change in life circumstances, changes of employment, these are the times that you should be letting your advisor know specifically what those changes are, so that we can go back and essentially stress test the viability of your financial plan and what those implications are.
Okay. And now we have a few more questions about the market, so it seems to be on a lot of people's minds. So Lauren and Bill wrote in here and asked, what has happened in the fixed income market versus equity markets? Equity markets are down. What has happened to the fixed income market?
Doug, that sounds like one for you.
It's a great question. And Andrew covered that off a little bit as he went through his presentation earlier tonight. So obviously, we've had this volatility in the equity markets, and so we went down. Now we're recovering. As I mentioned earlier, cash, there's been an impact there as well because interest rates have dropped as federal banks have responded to the crisis. And on the fixed income side, there's typically an inverse relationship between what interest rates do and return that you'll find with a bond. So in other words, as interest rates go down, the value of existing bonds that you're holding, which would have a higher interest rate, would go up because those bonds would be more coveted. So we've seen quite a bit of that. So some fixed income would have gone up. Now, the reason I sort of hedge my bet and I say that some fixed income would have gone up is there could be high yield bonds or other types of bonds that perhaps in the hunt for yield, in other words, where the managers were trying to find a higher rate of return or more interest, they would have went out and bought a bond in a company that maybe didn't have the same financial stability as, say, a federal government bond. So maybe they bought a bond in a corporation that might have been a double B bond versus a government which would be, let's say, a AAA bond. So those pay a higher interest rate, but you're taking on a little more risk. So if the market is concerned that company wouldn't be able to pay back the money on that bond could have gone down in value. So there's no direct answer to your question. I think the answer is to, again, reach out to your advisor or whoever invited you out to this call and sit down with them. They can look at what your individual holdings are and give you a better idea of how that's performed. But in general, I would say that bonds have increased a little bit through what we've gone through. I hope that answers your question.
Great. I have a few questions here from Andrea, who's actually living in retirement and thinking about how she'll make her retirement income last. So I'm hoping that someone can cover off what the mandates are around withdrawing a certain percentage from retirement savings, but also what people at that retirement stage are thinking is how do they now, given this market volatility, make sure that they have enough money to live on, because they're not looking to go out and earn more money. So how would you kind of recommend that she think about that?
Me to take that one? I changed my speaker, so I think you can hear me now.
Okay. I can hear you.
Perfect. Well, that's a $1 million question, and I'm glad you asked it, because you're at a stage right now where you've got your nest egg, which tends to also enhance your worry about it, because the people that still have the ability to go out and earn an income, they've got a bit of a safety net there because, they're not done saving yet, but, that's what you've got. So at times like this, it's even more important to focus on really three things. One is making sure that you've got a portfolio that's well diversified and will continue to grow and look after you over the span of time that you're still going to likely be alive. And the other one is to make sure that you do have enough diversity in there in the bonds and so on that are going to be safe havens at times like this. But the biggest single thing that you're going to want to do is make sure that you take a look and do your numbers. I keep coming back to that. Do your numbers to make sure that you've got it laid out in such a way that you're going to be able to make the money last over what would be anticipated to be your lifespan. And again, there's no easy answer to that one. The only way to figure it out is to run your numbers.
And this might be a related question that I received. Someone said, how do I tell if a goal is achievable? someone, and I love your wording on this, just wrote in and said, Andrew, you lost me at Monte Carlo. So Andrew, do you want to just take another stab at trying to explain what you mean by that for our audience?
Well, what Monte Carlo does is in most financial plans, what happens is we assume what I'm calling a linear rate of return. Linear meaning, in the one example, it was a 5.9% rate of return. So normally you'll assume 5.9 every single year, year in, year out, straight line, linear. And in reality, markets go up and down. The ups and downs make a tremendous impact on your longevity of your retirement assets, simply because if you can imagine, say you've got $1 million today and you're taking out $50,000 a year to live on. Well, that's 5% of your portfolio, and that's a 5% withdrawal rate. However, if the markets go down and say now your $1 million is worth $700,000 and you still take out your $50,000 a year, now you're at a much higher withdrawal rate. And so what Monte Carlo does is it's going to say, instead of making 5.9 every single year, maybe your average is 5.9, but it's going to say you're going to make 10 one year, 4 the next, 8 the next, 2 the next, 12 the next. And it's going to say, what is the impact of that going to be on your portfolio? And it's a calculation that is only able to be done by a computer. And so what happens is it takes all of those various scenarios that could possibly occur, and it breaks it out to what is your percentage likelihood of your plan coming to fruition. In other words, how many times could it fail? And so when you do that, if you've got a scenario where 90% of the time you're successful and only 10% of the time it fails, it's going to fail marginally, if at all. And so the Monte Carlo really gives us a very accurate view to, will your money last?
Great, thank you, Andrew. And then I kind of have some final questions. I think this will be our last one, and I'll put a few people's questions together. So I'm looking at a question from Sarah, as well as Blair and Kevin. So thank you for those. And we'll make sure that your consultants address them more one-on-one. But they were asking, is it a good time to buy? Should we be thinking differently about the stock market? Andrew, I know you made a comment about when tuna goes on sale. Why don't we hand over to Doug to kind of address that question about what do we do now in this current situation? What are some ways to think about that?
Sorry, was that one for me? Sorry, it was just a little bit tough to hear you there.
Doug. Oh, sorry if we cut it there. That was Doug's question. Is this a good time to buy?
There was a number of questions that came along those lines, whether we should be buying now or not. And my answer, if you look on the chat line in terms of what we have available there, is that I believe personally that the best time to buy is when you have money to invest, as it's virtually impossible to know what the markets are going to do. And I know that sounds like I'm shirking the question, but it's what I truly believe. The key is we need to know what our risk tolerance is. Then we build a portfolio that matches it. And based on everything we saw tonight, my opinion is when we look back on this time in the future, we're going to think that what an incredible opportunity this was to buy into the market. And again, as long as we're doing that consistently with what our risk tolerance is and buying the right investments, I think it's a great time. If we look back at 2008, 2009, while we were there in the midst of that crisis, it sure didn't feel like a great time to invest. If anything, it felt like the exact opposite. It felt like this is a terrible time to invest. But looking back just a year or two later, we saw a tremendous increase in the value of assets right across the board. And so, my personal belief is that that's what we're going to see again. And when we look at the valuations we've had, maybe just in the past month or so, and even now and moving forward, this is a tremendous time to invest. So that would be how I would answer that question, Leanne.
Thanks, Doug. And thanks everyone for all of your questions and for being active with our Q&A session. I'm going to hand it over to David to sign us out for this evening.
Thank you, Leanne. And I'd just like to take a moment and thank Andrew for his outstanding delivery of the content tonight. I hope you all found it informative and useful and even a bit entertaining. I know that, we put a lot of work into this to make sure that you left this evening's session with some valuable content. And I think the big takeaway here is, do you feel that you are on track to accomplish your goals? No one could have foreseen or planned for necessarily what we're dealing with the COVID situation facing us around the world. But one of the things we do have within our control are some of the decisions we make with regards to our finances and our plans. So I would encourage you, if you're working with an IG Wealth Management consultant, or if you're not working with IG Wealth Management consultant, to reach out and have that conversation and start that process, particularly about sustainability of your own financial plan. Give it a good stress test to make sure that whether you're on track or not on track, that you can make those adjustments that are so important to do so. And as we look down the line and think about what does the future hold for us, there's a lot of things we don't know are going to happen. What we do know is that if we put a plan in place, that we are in a better position to deal with these unexpected life circumstances. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and for your wonderful questions. And I hope you all stay safe and healthy, and look forward to brighter days ahead for everybody. Thank you.